Hey, everybody. If you're listening to this, you are listening to the first free hour of this episode of The Shift with Doug McKenty. If you like what you're hearing, please consider subscribing to the show in order to access the full feature-length versions of the podcast, as well as have access to the members forum, where we discuss potential topics and interviews and dive deep into the overall concept of the shift. For only $6 a month, not only do you get the full-length episodes, but also an opportunity to co-create with me, your host, Doug McKenty, the future of the show. Go to www.theshiftnow.com or patreon.com/theshift and sign up today in order to help make the shift possible. Thanks for listening and enjoy the show. Good morning, noon, or night, wherever and whenever you are listening to The Shift. I'm your host. My name is Doug McKenty. This episode was recorded on February 14th, 2021. I'm pleased to announce Sacha Stone is my guest today on the program. Sacha has been a tireless advocate for personal liberation against the forces of colonization for over 2 decades, and is well known in the alternative media space for his ability to describe the unseen spiritual and psychological forces that work both to create the slave matrix or dreamspell that entraps much of humanity, as well as the natural systems that have the ability to guide us into individuation and the recognition of our innate personal power. Sacha stands apart from most in alternative media as a result of his unique ability to access many of the most prominent influencers from around the globe, who seek to confront the powerful forces of colonization in order to return humanity to a peaceful, balanced, and sustainable future. His networks strive to promote an understanding of human progress based on a spiritual foundation reflective of holistic and integrative philosophies based on the concept of natural justice. His messaging urges those who will listen to awaken from the slumber of indoctrination into the Luciferian cult, to participate in the Ascension process that now propels humanity upward into the next level of cultural evolution. In order to promote this transformation, Sacha has engaged in a number of projects designed to produce real-world examples of a society motivated by personal liberation, rather than social engineering and manipulative tactics of control. As a founding member of the Humanitad Foundation, Sacha strives to brainstorm and implement alternative and sustainable community organization by working with stakeholders from around the world. The International Tribunal for Natural Justice brings the best and the brightest from science, law, and politics together to assess criminal behavior on a global scale by members of the power elite, while advocating for the many who have been adversely impacted by these actions that so clearly violate the central tenets of common law and natural justice. Find out more about these organizations at www.humanitad.org. Sacha's latest incarnation, the Lazarus Initiative, seeks to facilitate a series of symposiums throughout 2021 designed to expose the crimes of the criminal cabal while offering solutions to awaken humanity into the next phase of human evolution. Go to sachastone.com and sign up for up-to-date information concerning the initiative, which debuts on March 21st. As always, go to www.theshiftnow.com for hours of free content, sign up for the newsletter, or subscribe for full feature-length versions of The Shift. You can also keep in touch on YouTube and Facebook at The Shift with Doug McKenty, on Twitter at DMcKenty, or look us up on Gab, MeWe, Brand New Tube, Minds, and other social media sites. Remember to like, subscribe, and share these podcasts as we rely on listeners like you to help spread the word. Without taking any more time, I want to thank Sacha Stone for agreeing to this appearance on the program, and thank you for helping to make the shift. And hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this 70th episode of The Shift. I'm your host, Doug McKenty. I'm joined today by Sacha Stone. Really happy to have him. He's been a very busy man in the scene for many years, and we've got a lot to talk about, so I'm really excited to have him. Thanks so much, Sacha, for agreeing to be on the show. How are you doing today?
Good, Doug. Nice to see you. Nice to meet you, and a very warm greetings from the balmy Southeast Asian archipelago, Bali, Indonesia.
Well, I've heard about your work for a long time, and I'm excited to have you on the show because I think your particular strength is talking about the spiritual forces that are at work in the world today. And I wanted to kind of be able to take a step back because so many people, if they're not really awake to what's going on, if they're still stuck inside of the matrix, if you will, uh, they have a tendency to kind of laugh or scoff or just completely misunderstand alternative perspectives, indigenous perspectives, Eastern perspectives that really create a different paradigm, a different way of looking at life. And then I wanted to really kind of get down into the bare bones, because a lot of people also struggle to understand exactly how this matrix is created that they're living inside of. The metaphors that I like to use when I'm talking about this is essentially that if there's a yin and a yang of consciousness or metaphysics or spiritual thought on the planet, then on the one side we have sort of this empire consciousness, or this colonized mind. And then on the other side, we have maybe what you could describe as an indigenous consciousness, which includes, shamanism, Taoism, Eastern philosophy, things like that, Ayurvedic thought. Um, and I just wanted to kind of like really give the audience an understanding of how these two different forces are working against one another. A lot of times, people in the scene are throwing out words, Luciferianism, Saturnalianism, the Sabbatean, Frankist Sabbatean movement, things like this, or the Illuminati. And people don't really understand, what they're talking about or what those things mean, or because they're so foreign to the paradigm that they were raised within, they just kind of skip over it. They don't understand it, and then they just call it conspiracy theory and blow it off. So maybe we could start. Well, why don't we start with your own personal story, actually? How were you raised, and then how were you, in terms of your personal growth and your level of awareness? How did this kind of transformation maybe happen for you?
Respectfully, I don't want to dwell for longer than 30 or 40 seconds on my backstory because it's so boring, certainly to me now. But I grew up in Africa in a war, the war for independence for Zimbabwe. So I grew up in Rhodesia, which became Zimbabwe, and I was a refugee, stateless for 9 years after the war. So lived understanding this kind of disparity between the living and the dead, between the citizen and the stateless pile of bones walking around. So I got a very clear picture in my late teens throughout my 20s to the fiction of government and the fiction of states and crowns and what all of that bullshit represented.
Right.
So that's part of my own background story, and in then going forward to define what is it that architects and engineers, war and disease and poverty, and caring genuinely about that subject because I'd grown up being butchered by it. And that's been my journey. My journey has been a genuine straight line in search of pure truth, as it relates to how fucked up we are as a species and what those elements are that the cauldron of the human condition. And the more I went into that, and because I had a modicum of access and celebrity and what have you in my rock and roll years, I was able to springboard into getting access to meet with all the great and good at that time, talking about over 20 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
So having access to the Dalai Lamas and the Nelson Mandelas and the king of this and the queen of that was a great way for me to be able to go and sit down and have those conversations directly with leadership. And that just led to more doors opening and more doors opening and more doors opening. And because of my natural kind of slightly rock and roll shock poet irreverence, that was, I think, that was a kind of welcome texture in the portals of power. So I was kind of often received, by a president or whatever as a kind of oddity, because I was known to be a citizen diplomat, hard activist campaigner, looking to understand certain things, and also launching various initiatives along the way. I mean, I'm the biggest failure in modern history, probably, in terms of the output of the work I've done that hasn't succeeded. The initiatives I've tried to launch have been a dismal failure 9 out of 10 times. But I am born with this kind of white African resilience, and it's not an arrogance, but it's stamina. I've got tremendous amounts of stamina, and I will always dust myself down and go right back into the fight until I win. So that's my way, and that's my story. Now, that said, I've because of my genuine interest in the pursuit of inquiry as to what is behind the human condition, you naturally get drawn into the Sabbatean Frankist agenda. You naturally have to move into understanding the chess play, or trying to understand the chess play. And because I'm able to then study things and then also corroborate them with leadership, because I've got that access, that's been an amazing advantage. And I think that's possibly what's marginally interesting about my voice, is that there's a lot of corroboration with what I say. So I don't just come out as some angry, long-haired, lunatic screaming against the system. I'm doing it on behalf of people who are trapped in the system. And I'm oftentimes speaking the words of the frustrated leadership themselves. So what I've learned is that most people are good people by far, even at the top of the pyramid. This is what most people don't get, but then most people are stupid. The demographic of people that you described at the front of this interview, I don't foundationally respect. So let me qualify what I mean by that. The kind of people who are asking questions, but not really asking questions. Mm-hmm. They're asking questions because they're pedestrian and suburban and lazy, and they're too busy plugged into the pornography of trivia or Netflix or daytime TV or, football, whatever. No disrespect. If that's your gig, enjoy it. But round about now, when we're facing the gravest existential threat to our species, you're a moron, you're an imbecile. And frankly, it's unconscionable that you're not focused absolutely on what's going on in front of you. Because right now, your government has gone rogue. The Catholic Church went rogue centuries ago. Okay, the Catholic Church became your government. And your government is now trying to kill you. Simple as that. And the travesty is that 85% of people in the government, whether you're talking parliamentarians or legislators or bureaucrats and technocrats, are decent people, most of them. I still think they're morons, because I don't know how anyone has the conscience to be able to take a paycheck from Cronus when Cronus is desecrating the fabric of human soul. When what's going on in hospitals and clinics and the public health sector today is so satanic and so evil. Mm-hmm. I don't know how those functionaries live with themselves beyond a certain point. I'm talking on a daily basis practically to countless people who are an exodus of medical professions who are leaving hospitals. 18 nurses in one hospital in Canada in the last few days, all mass resignation. Why? Because they refuse to go against their conscience and their Hippocratic oath any longer. They refuse to take rogue statutes from a satanic public health sector operating on behalf of the corporation masquerading as a government, operating on behalf of the central bank or reserve bank of that country, operating on behalf of the Bank of International Settlements and the satanic and luciferic interests in Davos and the Bilderbergers and elsewhere. So that trickle-down effect is kind of locked and loaded. And good humans are standing up and stepping away and going, I'm not paying my life force. I'm not abrogating my conscience by fulfilling these rogue ordinances or regulations any longer. So that's the great awakening that's occurring. And that's the thing that I've spent over 20 years waiting to happen. So you look at me today, I'm the happiest man in the world. I was the unhappiest man in the world 10 years ago, 15 years ago, 20 years ago, 21 years ago, 22 years ago, because I knew about the fiction. I knew about the satanic aspect. I knew about what was happening in the basement. I couldn't articulate it particularly. But now I see that that's crept out of the basement. And to use apocryphal language, the beast of the sea has now clambered or slithered onto the land and is now in plain view. That, to someone like me, is an amazing revelation. That tells me that we've won. That tells me that it's humanity and God, if you want to create that combo. I would say it's the Adamite. So to answer your question, or to move into the dynamic of your question, what is it that we are? We are the Adamite. We are made of clay. We are coming from the earth, the telluric forces of the earth. We are all of this incredible stuff that makes up Tara or Gaia. So that's the Adamite, and we emerge in our primal innocence, in a sense, as clay, as we're birthed through the mother's canal and then docked into this insane world by doctors, giving birth to vessels, merchandise, chattel, all of which is indentured immediately from birth to the crown, to the state through registrations. And we are fictionalized into dead souls at birth. Nonetheless, that blessed creature that's coming squawking out of its mother's womb is the Adamite. Then the problem is the cult programming begins from that day.
Mm-hmm.
And the cult programming is compounded by cultural proclivities and religious proclivities and social mores and familial mores. And all of this cult programming completely mutates that Adamite creature born of clay into what? Into becoming some mindfuck drone class plantation slave in the 21st century that can just about, work out that it has its own soul, but doesn't have a navigation set. That's most of us have that kind of cult programming afflicting us. And all that seeks to do is to disrupt that natural innate connection source that the Adamite is born with. So we have to really get back to the source coding and learn to receive people's souls into this world, step back, do no education at all, none. And so that's what I've just said is shocking to most of the suburbanites that you referred to,
Right.
the most pedestrian people, because we think in terms of education and economics and ecology, but all of those are the cult programming. And we failed to apprehend that. You don't need to count 1 + 1 = 2 on a piece of paper. You know how to count apples and oranges innately as an Adamite. In fact, you know how to calculate so much more when you're not educated. You learn to observe the sun, moon, and stars and the seasons. You learn to connect with your senses, what your eyes see, what your gut feels, what you hear, what you compute properly, organically, and as a sentient, blessed soul when you're not being educated. So it all comes back to that, essentially. That's the big battle that you were describing in your opening preamble between them and us. It's all about the degree to which I choose or permit myself to be cult programmed by it.
Yeah, so let's talk about this. I mean, again, I would completely agree with you about this concept of that the vast majority of us, if we were raised inside of this system, have been basically indoctrinated into a cult. But where does that cult come from, and what's at the top here? I mean, you've even described people in leadership positions that you've met and discussed, personally, who are also frustrated about this force that's at work that they don't seem to be able to touch. And so it's like, and that's the thing about it, is it seems to be at such a high level, at such the top of the pyramid, that it's hard to put your finger on exactly, who or what. And then for people to be able to wake up and understand that there is some force that's actually manipulating them on this higher level, it's challenging because they've been indoctrinated and they have cognitive dissonance and they can't see outside of what they're getting on, the nightly news or the media or through the education system and whatever is going on. So like you use that word, the chronos, like, what do you mean about that? Let's start there.
So Kronos describes the greatest poison, in a sense, that's been introduced into the zeitgeist, which is time itself, just the idea of it. So the time is what incrementally created a corridor for demonic lower astral and elemental cloud intelligence intervention into this world from the subtle realms. So in simple terms, demonic possession. In explicit terms, the progenitors of the human race are not just, we're not just born of the earth. We're also hybrids, galactic or cosmic hybrids. And we've been spliced and diced for millennia by all sorts of off-world intelligences that have variously, through various galactic wars, held a thrall over this planet in one epoch or another. That's well documented and well understood to anyone who's not brain dead. So the point is, we are a cosmic hybrid. We're a galactic hybrid. That's what the human being is. When we look to understand genetics and we look to understand the cellular DNA of microbes, which make up 95% of all microbial forms, we are spaceborne. So forget everything you think you know about science and about astrophysics and all the rest of it, because all of that is contained narrative. The fact is that we're in an electric universe, as dear Velikovsky pointed out, or tried to decades ago. So we're in an electric universe, and there is life teeming in space, absolutely teeming. We now know that it's proven by tardigrades, these creatures that live in deep space and can live for millennia, right. And then are, space-borne and seed planets. So, all of that's going on. There's a huge confluence of life that is conspiring to continue seeding and cross-fertilizing, sun systems and solar systems and planets and so on. But we are that. The human being emerges as that creature. And recognizing that innate multidimensionality is what is the challenge to us, because we are again cult programmed into believing that we're limited, and we're limited because we are the utility of external agents that are living through us. So the demonic possession bit is very real. Any soldier who puts on a uniform and gets conscripted into the army, either mandatorily or not, it's immaterial. It's always a matter of conscience. If you do get conscripted into the army and you don't stand up to your conscience, and you pick up a gun and you go forth like a good little drone slave and you shoot, other people in the head because you're told to by your major or by, your whatever, that there is the breach of the soul covenant right there. Following orders is the breach of the covenant. Mm-hmm. Any orders. You could be a bureaucrat in a post office bullying an old woman who's trying to send something, through the mail service, and you could obstruct something there. And that's an act, that's a satanic act. That's a Saturnian act. It's anti-life. It's entropic. So we are filled with covenants in every step of the way in our lives. There are constant entanglements, relationships, events, and circumstances which confluence around us. And it depends on our capacity to be in our Adamite Christed center, to be able to navigate those engagements in honor and in truth with right action, or be a prick, be the little petty tyrant in the uniform, go against our conscience, breach and abrogate the fabric of human relationship and soul. And that's the battleground that's taking place constantly in the world, every day, even in the most menial life and story. And that's the point. A lot of people think that their own life is, no one can see what they're up to. They're just dirty little people leading dirty little lives, following appetites and being petty tyrants. Off the radar even. But that, you see, you are there, center ground of the battlefield, between light and dark, between the demonic and the angelic. Everyone in that situation should really recognize that they're an avatar, that they are the Messiah, that they are the Christed one, and they can transmute and transcend any shitty little storyline into a magnificent story, an epochal revelation. But we must all own that we are extensions of the divine in order to begin that. Sorry, I started riffing slightly left field there.
No, it's all good. I mean, I guess I just want to kind of pull it back too. I mean, you start talking about star people and you start talking about multidimensional realities, and that's something that's going to throw people off if they haven't been exposed to those kinds of ideas. But what I wanted to bring up was that these ideas are fundamental to almost every other culture in the history of the world, besides this colonized culture that kind of started in Europe that has spread now around the world. If you've been educated, or as we've kind of discussed, maybe indoctrinated into this colonized system of consciousness, then you're not allowed access to these kinds of ideas. But they're ubiquitous in all other cultures everywhere else. So it's just kind of funny to me that you'll be talking about an idea, and I guess I'm just trying to I'm trying to imagine myself, because I was raised here in the United States and educated in the same typical system, and I had to go through quite a long process of being able to open my mind to the possibilities that the world was very different than from what I was taught, and just how to get somebody to kind of go from that state of I'm just watching the nightly news every night, and then be able to be open-minded enough to access these kinds of ideas where suddenly you're in the midst of, as you describe, essentially a spiritual battle between Luciferianism and the Godhead inside each and every one of us. It's just a big leap for people, and I wonder how to make that, how to describe this in terms that a lot of people can understand, and maybe just kind of like crack that nut in
Let's
those
do it.
individuals
Let's
that can't.
start. I mean, let's start
Yeah,
on
right.
math, geology. Where do you want to start? Because I'll tell you what, you could. There's not a subject you could pull out that I can't draw back with you in conversation to what we're talking about. But at
Right.
the end of the day, the people that you're speaking to, the ones that apparently need convincing, are these people sitting on bar stools drinking their fifth beer at 11 o'clock in the morning? I don't know that. And if they are, I have no interest in the conversation. It's like
Sure.
this shuffle off. I have no interest in trying to convince the unconvincible. If people either resonate to pure truth or they do not. And if they don't, they can't be convinced. And I'm sure as hell not wasting my life force to try and do a Socratic debate to somebody who's not equal to it. So, and I also foundationally, Doug, disagree with you. I think that the overwhelming majority of human beings, even in suburbia, are absolutely conversant with the cosmogenesis stories and ET interventions, abductions, and
Right.
all the weird shit that makes up the human condition. Reader's Digest 30 years ago was talking about alien abductions. So by now we kind of know the jig is up, man. We all know about ETs. We all know about demonic possessions. Well, what we don't like to do, apparently, is we don't like to recognize that because I'm drinking my fifth beer of the day by lunchtime, I'm the one who's actually creating a corridor for demonic possession. My stupid, mundane little appetites and addictions to nicotine, to pornography, to food, to donuts, to whatever, that is the corridor for demonic interposition and intervention. We don't want to confess up to that. We don't want to own that we are the technology of the divine and that we are the ones violating the sacrament by continuing to pursue only our egoic objectives or our appetites.
Right.
So that's where it becomes an uncomfortable conversation with most people, because in that sense, those people are too stupid or mundane to get it. But we really mustn't focus any longer on trying to retrieve the irretrievables. And I'm not being disrespectful to those people. Those people hate my guts anyway and will be trolling the threads. So I don't care. I'm really interested in the Adamites. I'm interested in the sons and daughters of God. I'm interested in really helping our brothers and sisters and myself to move forward into this progressivist, ascensionist paradigm and to elevate ourselves and rise like Lazarus from the dead, which is exactly what we're doing right now, or at least we've been given the opportunity to at the galactical level, to seriously transmute and transcend our entire field of expression from a carbon-based life form into a diamantine, silica, crystalline, a superluminal species, which is the true human. The realized, actualized Adamite becomes the Christ, the Christed one. That's the language, that's the journey, that's the hologram I inhabit already, and a great many people are awakening to that. That's the conversation we should be focused on and within. But happy to talk to any of this other stuff. But beyond a certain point, like I said, why are we trying to retrieve the irretrievables? In any battle, in any war, there is a known fact that you triage your own if you want to win the war, win the battle.
Right.
You can't constantly stop, put your gun down and run to the back of the line and bandage people up, because you will absolutely lose the war. You've got to stay as infantrymen, as cavalrymen. You've got to keep, moving. And I think that that's where the social ecology is right now. There's a lot of people who are falling. This corona, COVID, vaudevillian crowning glory of our endemic stupidity is a fantastic gift to humanity. This last year has been the greatest gift imaginable, because it is inviting a separation between the living and the dead, the masked and the unmasked, the sane and the insane, the Christed and the unchristed ones. And that's clear. Anyone who enjoys this charade, anyone who enjoys wearing a fucking pantyhose on their face and destroying their own immune system and that of their kids, much worse. Those creatures must depart this world sooner than later if they enjoy that pantomime. they are by definition perverse. And people who want to be saved by Bill Gates and Anthony Fauci and by their local deviant public health administrator, those people must shuffle off this mortal coil. They're not welcomed in this world any longer. Anyone who agrees with the overbearing tyranny of the state or the crown or the government or the Catholic Church and wants to be sodomized by the matriarchy or the patriarchy of the government, the nanny state, or the overbearing Saturnian father that keeps bludgeoning us, and penalizing us and taxing us. If people genuinely want that as a reality, they must leave this world, because this world does not invite that kind of soul consensus anymore. That's the alchemy of what's taking place. And it's axiomatic. It's like the threshold event of the crowning glory of our awakening to our own sleepwalking, or within our own sleepwalking, Doug. And that's why I say it's all good. It's all beautiful geometry. But we must, especially those of us who do care and are empathic and compassionate about our fallen brothers and sisters, know at a certain point, it's more important that we get to the front of the line and continue to fulfill our duty of care.
Right. I mean, that's what's so interesting about this. What seems to be going on, at least from my point of view, is I've been thinking a lot lately about, I mean, I kind of look at this colonizing force or the colonized mind as maybe like a narcissist or a narcissistic personality disorder. And that's what we're dealing with, these sort of narcissistic leaders that are indoctrinating people into this psychology of control. They're gaslighting people using the mainstream media. It's psychological abuse. And I guess, I appreciate the triage analogy, because I almost maybe feel overwhelmed with the desire to want to help everybody, who's been damaged by the psychological abuse. And there are so many out there that are just so unwilling to wake up out of it. They're so, well, I mean, I've been kind of thinking of it as a kind of I call it the trauma bond, or a type of Stockholm syndrome, essentially, where people have learned to identify with their oppressors. In fact, like here in the United States, I've been just blown away by how many people identify, say, as Democrat or Republican, and then they just fight each other all the time. And it's like it's literally a part of their personal identity. And when I try to have a conversation with them, they just come right back with, here's what the Democrat thinks, or here's what the Republican thinks, and they can't think for themselves. They're not.
Sure.
What do you think? I want to know.
Let me speak to that momentarily, please, because a lot of people, especially mothers, will resonate with what I'm saying. The syndrome you're dealing with here is a simple one. If you pay attention to a brat, to a child that's gone rogue, and you give too much attention to it, you literally turn that creature into a psychopath. Okay, you have too much motherly love to that creature when that creature is acting in an aberrant way whilst it's growing up. You forge the wrong neural synapses in that child. That child knows that every time it throws its mug to the floor, starts screaming, it's going to get the attention. It's going to be able to harvest life force from mummy and then from the world. Of course, when that child leaves home and there is no mummy out there who gives a fuck about the child's tantrums, then they're not getting the attention from the world. They start to then hate the world. They turn into the Jeffrey Dahmers of the world. That's how sociopaths and psychopaths genuinely got too much love and attention from the mother in the wrong way. Okay? So be very mindful of that.
Right.
So it's very important that with these brothers and sisters that you're referring to, who are bringing up the rear, so to speak, and they're consistently going, no, and they're the naysayers and the detractors and the snipers and the trolls, and we're turning around giving them attention for their sniping and their trolling. Do you get it?
Sure.
We're creating feedback that they want. They're the parasite. The minute you take your attention completely from them, leave them at the back of the line, turn towards the front, you're going to actually help them more that way. Because some of those that are still redeemable will go, fuck, I'm not getting the attention I need and I crave. And they've got to run to the front of the line to get attention again. That's the actual syndrome of how you help people by cutting off and not feeding into their toxicity.
Yeah, it's kind of an enabling behavior pattern, actually.
Oh,
I see what you're saying.
Good.
Yeah, that's fascinating. It is fascinating. And again, I guess just kind of sticking with this psychological metaphor. Well, I mean, let's continue to take steps and steps back, like where does this narcissistic system come from? It's been going on for a long time. This psychology. And I see it as, I almost can look at it and see it as the growth of the empire. But when we're really talking about like this Luciferianism, I mean, maybe we could just talk about like what is the Illuminati, or what is this satanic spirituality that's out there, and how does it work to dominate our society so completely, or so much of our society? Because I've even had this revelation that a lot of people really, I mean, they're raised in indigenous families or whatever, they're raised with lots of these different ideas. I just happen to come from this background where I was, raised in what I would say inside the colony, inside the empire, and I was trained that way growing up, and I had to grow out of it. But so many people have not been raised this way, and were just raised naturally, as you're discussing. But nonetheless, what would you say about, what is this Luciferian movement? And
let's talk about it.
Yeah, describe that Sabbatean Frankist lineage and that kind of thing.
I'm gonna do it because I've been doing it for the last week or two. I decided it would be a healthy thing to pot boil 2,000 years into 2 minutes or 3 minutes for people.
Sounds good.
Because I think that's going to help get the focus. So you begin with where we were at a couple of thousand years ago with Canaanite ritualism. Okay. So thousands of years ago, Canaanite ritualism and worshipping Baal was essentially the thing. That's the source coding, okay? So that's the Canaanites and the tribe of Dan. That then led through Nimrod and Osiris to the pharaohs of Egypt in the instance of Osiris, which is Amun-Ra, to Marduk, kings of Babylon, and that was through Nimrod, okay? And that connects into through the King Solomon's line and the priests of Karnak, okay, flanked by the Roman Empire and the Judean period. That feeds into the genesis of monotheism, okay, which is collectivized religious idolatry and worship. That then, through the Hellenization and what you'd refer to as Sol Invictus connected to the Roman Empire, creates the Vatican. The Vatican complex, okay, which Council of Nicaea 325, 328 AD, that was the weaponization of the Christed message. The weaponization of Christianity occurred with the Vatican. And that's the inversion of the cross, of the Christos, okay? That's when the cross turned upside down, St. Peter and all that bullshit. Then the Crusades and the Dark Ages, okay, variously led to the Knights Templar in the 12th century and the Khazar Empire, the Khazarian Empire. So the Khazars and the Templars essentially become the progenitors of usury, manipulation, exploitation of human time, motion, and life force into units, systems, tabulations, registrations, okay?
Right.
1066, doomsday, all of that is the unitizing, the systematizing, the monetizing, the securitizing of human beings, of living souls into dead fictions. Kabbalah comes into that. That all leads, I'm talking about Vatican, Templar, and Khazarian Empire, leads to the formation of Switzerland. This is the genesis of consolidated central banking, command and control. Okay, and that then through the Merovingians and black nobility, which is the genesis point of what you would call the Illuminati, moves through the Inquisitions and the Venetian trade lines and corridors to the Masons and the Jesuits. So the Masonic traditions emerge then, the secret societies. Okay, 18th century really locks in there, and the Society of Jesus through that a demon, Ignatius Loyola, in the 16th century. That's 1530, early 1530s. Mm-hmm. So the Jesuits and the Masons become the kind of compartmentalized fractality of the evil empire, and that boom through Glorious Revolution and all of that, the Rothschild dynasty at that point, the United Kingdom, okay, being essentially behind the Illuminati. That then locks and loads. This is Victoriana, Okay, this is big stuff. Now we're talking about supremacy and dominion globally with one Luciferic vision. 1776 Bavarian Illuminati. That then leads to things like Council of Foreign Relations, the Bilderbergers, the Tavistock Institute, the Fabianist Agenda. And from the Masons, you get the birthing of the Federal Reserve System. Okay, this is the takeover of the printing of money. So it's no longer a sovereign preserve of a country to handle its own currency. This is now franchised to a third party, an agency, like the Catholic Church, taking over money, printing of money, completely independent of government, nothing to do with the choice of the consensus of the living souls. Okay, and the Jesuits, obviously with their holy alliances, all of that leads to 1776, United States of America. That's the Masonic Atlantean kind of genesis point, and that we refer to as Novus Ordo Seculum. That becomes the complete weaponization of government and governance globally. Now you've got 200 plus corporations masquerading as governments around the world, all of them indentured into the Vatican complex through Basel, Switzerland, a principality with the Bank of International Settlements, essentially London, the city of London, which commands and controls all of that, and Vatican, District of Columbia, DC. So DC, London, Basel, Switzerland, Vatican, boom. Those four. They've got a bunch of other satellites they've set up, like Singapore, like Monaco. They've got their little free ports and free zones all around the world. Then they've got, 10,000 military bases around the world as well, and they've got the global military industrial complex. They've got all of the intelligence agencies, CIA, all of them in 200 plus nations, all owned and controlled by them.
Right.
Feeding back to the black papacy behind the Vatican. So now that's essentially a 2,000 years potted history of how we went from sacrificing babies to Moloch and to Baal to actually forming corporations and giving them all of our power and saying, fuck us, kill us, mutate us, poison us, do what you like to us, because we are idolaters. Yes, we are. Absolutely abject idolaters. And that's the point. So if we can awaken within the idolatry, it's the same old shit that happened when Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, went and sacked the Kaaba and destroyed all of the idols in the Kaaba. God love him for that. The same thing as the blessed Yeshua, Master Jesus, Isa bin Maryam, when he went in and overthrew the moneylenders' tables. And also called out idolatry. Same thing when Musa came off Mount Sinai, St. Catherine's Mountain, went down to the base of the mountain and saw the imbecile class of revelers worshiping the golden calf. Idolaters, the lot of them. Same old goddamn complex, age after age after. The question is, where do you stand in that? Can you actualize within that or not? That's the question.
Right. Because by being idolatrous, you're referring to thinking that the Godhead is outside of you. You're no longer directly connected. You're looking outside of you for that connection, for something that's going to make choices for you. You're looking to an authority to make those choices for you. And
the rosary beads is idolatry. The prayer books is idolatry.
Right.
The temples and the cathedrals, the synagogues and the mosques, all of that is idolatry. If it's got a wooden bench in it, that's it. There's your church right there. If it's got a wooden pew, a wooden bench, by all means go to that altar. Anything beyond that is Catholicism, which is based on the sacrifice of the Cathars. God love them, every one of them. That is the true travesty. That's the abomination. Is the massacre of the Cathars and the blood spilled from the Cathars forming the genesis of the Catholic Church. And again, I know bishops, I know Silver Star Knight commanders in the Vatican, I know powerful people from the Pilgrim Society throughout the United Nations elsewhere, and I love the brothers and sisters I've met in those hallowed portals. I know Knights of Malta and Orders of St. John Knights, and I love them. I've got no problem with the individuals because I've recognized that they don't know what I know about that order. And you see, that's the point. They are also harvested variously as good souls into unwitting indentureship to and service to that seal, that badge, that throne. And that's the travesty of it. We are all of us variously in the thrall of idolatry without knowing it. There's very few of us who are barefoot on the soil. And that's the clarion call right now, is a return to our innocence and the beginning again of seeing the world through the eyes of a child, which to me is the single most important element of our regenesis. We must return to that innocence. We must, and that's to say, Doug, that's to say, walk out of your front door every single day and do not cast judgment. Do not throw stones. Do not cast judgment. By all means, be circumspect. Analyze all you like. Bear witness as much as you possibly can. Observe, but do not cast stones. That is so wrong, because the minute you've cast a stone at anything or anyone, you have essentially harmed self. Because for me to judge anything negatively outside is for me to recognize that I have not yet resolved that aspect, archetypal aspect within. So that's what life offers us in the holograph. Whatever we hate externally represents in geometric proportion, geometric proportion. It speaks to the unresolved aspect of that archetype within myself. And so anyone making harsh judgment or condemnation of another is doing that. Like, if you've got a condemnation, that's fine. You keep it to yourself. If somebody's harming the weak, the vulnerable, the infirm, or breaching your own sovereign space, do what you need to, up to and including shooting them in the face with a .38 Smith & Wesson. I got no issue with that. I've got no moral position on defending the weak, the infirm, the vulnerable, and your own sovereign preserve. That's godly to do so. But I'm saying, don't condemn, don't judge, don't gossip, don't wheeze, don't throw stones, don't snipe. That's the disgusting element of the slime ball element of the trolls and the snipers and the naysayers and the ankle biters and the dirty little customers in the world, who are not resolved within themselves, and they can only find life force or animus by parasiting it off.
Okay, sorry, ladies and gentlemen. I lost Sacha for just a second. He's all the way over in Bali, and I think we're both dealing with a little bit of bad weather. I am here. Our internet connection's a bit spotty, so bear with us. But I want to continue, and I want to talk a little bit more in depth about the holographic reality in just a little bit. But I'd like to dwell for just a few more minutes on what you were discussing about the weaponization of the patriarchal religions, the father god religions, Christianity and Islam and Judaism, or you mentioned Christianity more specifically. But what do you mean by weaponization? And then I guess where I'm going with that is you see it as a kind of a caste system. You just did a great job of describing the lineage going all the way back to the worship of Baal and Moloch that the very top of the pyramid is following. But then everybody else underneath the pyramid, I see it as this type of caste system, right? Where they don't know the information that the guys at the top know, but they use these other techniques to essentially enslave. It's psychological warfare, only it's 3,000 years old, right? And so they've been able to manipulate the people farther down in the pyramid over this long period of time. Yeah, go ahead.
So you've got the geometry wrong, and I'll tell you why. And this is the piece. If I brought anything in the last 15, 20 years into the movement of truth and disclosure, it'll be one thing, which is that I have explained countless times over many years that it is not the capstone of the pyramid that is contaminated necessarily, and it is not the body politic of the pyramid either. There is an intercessionary level between the capstone and the body politic, and that is where the satanic influence and the technocracy is nested. Okay. That is why you've got the capstone removed with a cloud beneath the capstone, then the eye in the capstone on the Ordo Ab Chao totem on the US dollar. Mm-hmm. That's connected to understanding that the capstone is oftentimes populated by good presidents and prime ministers and kings and queens and emperors and bishops and even popes, who don't know anything about the blood sacrifice and about the sacraments going on in the basement. They're kept from it, but deliberately. And the body politic is kept ignorant. That's the technocracy and the bureaucracy and the suburbanite pedestrian reality. It is a technocratic sliver of evil that is implemented between the capstone and the body politic. I witnessed it myself in the United Nations. because I met with leadership and they were thoroughly good human beings,
Right.
innocent, decent, good human beings. And they were secretary generals, director generals, top bosses. I've met over 230, 40 kings and queens and sultans and rajas in my life. Okay. I know at least 30 or 40 of them well, and can communicate with make a phone call and communicate as not as a friend, but as a good human to good human. I've picked up so much in those conversations, in those meetings and engagements.
Mm-hmm.
And I can tell you the overwhelming majority are thoroughly good human beings. And when I've had conversations with people at that level, and I'm not acting as an apologist for evil kings and queens and evil presidents and prime ministers. God knows there are a lot of those out there. But in my estimation, it's probably 15%, 20% are directly invested in what I'd call the sacraments, the blood sacraments, and the kind of Babylonian Mysterian cult, high ranking. But the same thing, I apply the same logic to academia. There's the same logic to the professors and the dons and the fellows of universities and the Ivy League and the Oxbridge set. A lot of them are genius, brilliant human beings, quite flawed in their way, but they don't know about the perversion of education through the Fabianist agenda. They are just a professor of economics or a professor of theology, and they just have their little universe. And these are not people who've understood this holographic truth to the perversity of education wholesale. And that's the danger of specialization that we have as a species.
Right.
We're trained into being very specialized, and that's it. So we never get the big picture. That's part of the cult programming.
Yeah, compartmentalization, right? Where everybody becomes an expert, but then they can't see the big picture ever, and they can be used. They can be useful idiots without knowing what they're doing. Yeah.
Nicely put.
Well, and then will you speak? And that's a great point, actually, because I think, and I've seen this a lot too, where the leadership actually sometimes, I mean, they're trying to do the right thing clearly, and I don't get the impression that they're evil. And it is interesting, and it does seem like it's just beneath them, the bureaucrats, the intelligence agencies, that there's something else going on, and they actually have the ability to stifle anything positive that the like you're talking about, the presidents or the prime ministers really want to accomplish. And I imagine sometimes it's very frustrating for them because they can't. They're trying
desperately frustrating. You have no idea how frustrating. I have held high-ranking leaders sobbing, literally sobbing, crying on my shoulder on a couple of occasions. The last time was only about 6 months ago, when a king was crying on my shoulder, literally. It was taking me to a part of the palace to look at something, and we were discussing history and the travesty of how kingdoms around the world were also infiltrated by the Jesuits and their lands and their people destroyed. And this particular king, it wasn't 6 months ago, it was well over a year ago. This Corona year seems to be like a gap. It was about a year and a half ago. It was before the Corona thing. And this particular king, and he turned at a given point, and I could see his eyes welling up as we were talking about the travesty of what had happened to his father. And it was such a sad moment. And at that point, I just went to embrace him. And he started sobbing like a child on my shoulder. But Christ, I started crying. Very, very sad stuff. I mean, that's human engagement, And this is as real can be. So again, this idea of them and us, we've got to be really careful. We have to see the world through the eyes of a child, and we must not judge. And the only time we must make a determination about something is when we know, based on the law of absolute fact and verity and probity and integrity, because I'm there and I see it, I witness it. But to repeat the law of first report or the law of second report is just to participate in the mania, the white noise and the trivia of our existence. And too many idiot people, salamanders sitting in moth-eaten armchairs, punching into their telephones and into their computer screens and thinking that they can be judge and jury and executioner of reality. Well, fuck you. I mean, it's disgusting and such unchristly, ungodly behavior to judge and condemn and have this venal little uninformed opinions and then pepper the social media threads with your stupid ideas. How about a bit of dignity? How about a bit of meekness? How about a bit of honor? And step into the knowing that you know fuck all or very little. Now get back to the good book and go and study Ephesians. Go and study these amazing chapters that can really help you clad yourself and armor up with honor and dignity and truth. And then go out into the fray and go and challenge the local authorities, the local tax officials, the local customs and excise, the local, bureaucrats. Go and do something to redeem this world and bring us back from the edge. Have the balls to get out of your moth-eaten armchair. I say what I just said in the last 3 minutes because that, to me, Doug, is the problem right now, is that I don't know what the percent is of suburbanites and pedestrian people who are judges, juries, and executioners of reality, who never leave their front door in honor or in integrity and do bugger all to actually change the fabric of reality through consciousness in action, through service to others over service to self. I am sick of humans expressing their dirty little opinions.
Sounds good. Well, do you want to spend a few minutes before you go discussing some of the projects that you've been working on? I mean, we've been talking kind of theoretically, but I want to give you a chance to tell my audience about some of the actual work that you're doing with the Humanidad Foundation and the International Tribunal for Natural Justice. We could talk about the concept of natural justice for just a few minutes.
Thank you, Doug. So ironically, 2-3 months ago, I would have said, no, I'm not selling anything. I'm not looking for followers. I'm not looking to sell anything. Actually, now let me just put on my little whore beanie and say I am selling something. It's an idea. I'm launching an initiative on the 21st of March called the Lazarus Initiative. My team and I are putting this together right now. And it launches as for 1 year. It's a planetary conversation. I'm launching 7 symposiums starting on the 21st of March. There's going to be a big powwow. It'll be a marathon live stream. And I'm bringing together leading activists, military and intelligence figures, investigators, medical scientists, researchers, survivors, victims, clairvoyants, remote viewers, and experts in multiple disciplines to talk about how we resurrect ourselves from the dead. That's why I'm calling it the Lazarus Initiative. Mm-hmm. And it's all about AI, transhumanism, Morgellons syndrome, ET intervention of the human genome, and how we need to now awaken as a body, as a collective, and step into the knowing to throw that devil off our collective back. So that's launching 21st of March online. Anyone can check that through going to my website, sachastone.com, SACHASTONE.com. You can sign up or subscribe there to my weekly journal, and you'll be kept abreast of it. We're also launching a proper journal called the Lazarus Initiative alongside the symposium. So every 2 months, there'll be a symposium. Every alternating 2 months, we're releasing like a digest or a journal, which will have all of the information, the remedies, the treatments, the cures, the investigations, the analytics of AI, transhumanism, genetic intervention, ETs, all of that stuff. And I'm talking about the greatest assembly of experts in the world, because I know most of them by now. I've interviewed a great many of them. Many of them have interviewed me. So I'm bringing in all the top guns in the world who can speak to these subjects, or those that are actually explicitly in the game. So that's going to happen starting 21st of March. People keep tuned in for the Lazarus Initiative. That's the main thing I'm really talking about. And that does speak to natural justice, just to tail off on the last thing that you kindly invited me to do, to speak a bit about natural justice, natural law. Natural justice comes through understanding, through comprehending what understanding means, should I say. Standing under is not a good thing. Comprehending, being comprehensive about our understanding is a good thing. The status quo, how we got here, where we take things from here. Natural justice is the Adamite, is the true human, saying, I understand that nature organizes itself through patterns of perfection. We come along and mutate those patterns of perfection, poison things, bond things into indentureship and invisible contracts, and then spellbind them by using cult programming. So spells, bonds, and poisons is what I've come to after 22 years of inquiry. That's what we're living in the thrall of. where we should be moving into our Christed nature through elevating art and beauty and consciousness, stepping away from time, 1260 time. I never finished that conversation earlier. Maybe we can do another chat at some point and really just drill into time.
Mm-hmm.
So I want to explain to people how DNA is affected by the idea of time, how death, entropy, and the moving into the mortal realm happened because of time, the imposition of time, which we bought as an idea. But when we step out of time and relinquish adherence to 1260 time and the mutancy of the Babylonian, Gregorian calendric systems,
Right.
and step back into the immanent quantum matrix, so to speak, then we move back into the immortal paradigm, which is happening in our life anyway. The vertical integration of the Ascension event happening in 2046. And again, I'm going to stick with this because that's my learning. I've spoken to thousands of experts, thousands of clairvoyants, thousands of people, shamans and medicine men and prophets and medicine wheels. All of that stuff indicate a singularity. I'm the one defining it as 2046 as the vertical integration of our ascension, connected to major astrophysical and astronomical events that are happening at that time. So that's just around the corner. 25 years, okay? Remember, 9/11 was only 20 years ago. Feels like yesterday, 20 years ago. So we are at this point, we're now at a rush towards the gate of ascension.
Yeah.
And it's a beautiful thing because it's not like, Ezekiel's chariot or some Pleiadian starship's going to come. They may come as well. I wouldn't pay much attention to either of them. They'll almost certainly be steeped in idolatry. But the fact that we are steering this planet, and by extension, Earth, Tara, takes the entire solar system with it. Trust me, the Adamite is the most powerful force in the temporal universe. That's us, once we've awakened, you and I, and our brothers, our brethren, our fellows, the fellowship of man, or woman. I should be a bit more kind of woke on that. So the fellowship of woman, okay, is what steers planets and solar systems and entire quadrants of the universe. And that's where we're at right now. We're steering this toward our next evolutionary phase, which is a hyperdimensional state of being, where we move into the quantum, the immanent, the immortal, whilst we're still in form and shape, and we can touch and feel. So it's a big story, and the Lazarus Initiative is going to go a hell of a long way toward exploring the dimensions of that revelation. At the same time, realizing that government, church, reason, intellect are not the things that they've served us to a point, to awakening. But now that we've awoken within the dream spell, we can take it from here. And we don't need rules and regulations and ordinances and penalties and courts and legislators and parliamentarians and representatives. We don't need the Catholic Church. We don't need intermediates or intercessionaries. We don't need the Jesuitical element anymore. We simply need to awaken and become part of that fellowship and start to self-organize and anchor patterns of perfection to this world.
So do you see then this sort of coronavirus thing and this move on the part of the Satanists and the technocrats? Do you see it as a kind of a last gasp? Are you optimistic that they're going to fail at this and then the ascension is going to happen as a result?
I've been saying that throughout, that I'm all about optimism. That's why I'm taking the conversation to the vertical integration of our ascension. If I didn't believe that, if I believed that COVID-19 pantomime had any thrall or traction on reality, I wouldn't be speaking about those other subjects. But yes, I think that it's over. I think that the Corona COVID-19 New World Order fantasia is just that. It was just a kind of aggregated orchestra of chaos and of the surrendered aspects of consciousness that we represent as a species, making manifest in the field, coming back at us in geometric proportion to the degree to which we have not realized ourselves as a species.
Right.
And so that thing comes back at us in the field to harm us and to slice and dice us and to, ultimately cull us into a mass sacrifice of innocence. Yeah. Great fantasy. Not going to happen. Thanks. Are a number of people going to choose that fantasy? Yes. Are they doing so? Yes, they are. Should they do so? Yes, they should. Wear the mask, get the injection. Good luck. Sayonara, baby. See you later. That's it. But we now, the collective has won. We have won.
Mm-hmm.
That epochal war has already been won, in my humble opinion.
Well, sounds great, Sasha. Nice to end on a really positive note. Then it's good to hear. It's so easy to get depressed and feel really really frustrated about what's going on and what's happening. And it's good to know that you feel like maybe this is the end of this long era of oppression in a sense, and we're about to see this real big change into an era of liberation. So. I'm going to put my intention on that. And I definitely appreciate the work that you've been doing. We'll let everybody know one more time that they should check out the Lazarus Initiative starting on the 21st of March at sashastone.com. And I'll be looking forward to checking out that work. And then I'll just let my listeners know that you've been listening to The Shift. My name is Doug McKenty, and you can find all of my stuff at theshiftnow.com. And I am currently on YouTube and Facebook at The Shift with Doug McKenty. So if you want to get more information, you can check that out there. And I'm trying to get more and more people to go to the website and sign up to the newsletter, theshiftnow.com. And we'll stay connected that way so I don't have to deal with any of that social media stuff as things are moving forward. Right. So thank you so much for coming on, Sasha. And thanks again for all the work that you've been doing. Really appreciate it. And really enjoyed our conversation tonight. It was great to hear your perspective on what's happening and what's going on and get some clarification about these questions that I had. So
likewise. Thank you, Doug. Love talking to you, brother. Look forward to the next time.
Right on. Have a great day. All right, there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. My conversation with Sacha Stone. That was an interesting talk for me. I came in, I feel like, with a little bit of an idea. I almost was wanting to lead Sacha down a certain road, and it was almost like he didn't really want to go down there with me. And I don't know if we didn't get into the flow the way that I normally like to. I certainly enjoy the way that he describes reality and what's going on, and I really wanted to kind of get out of him a little bit more detail, because his description of the world in terms of the Dreamspell, in terms of the Luciferian, the Saturnarian, the Sabbatean consciousness that is at work here, I think, in the social engineering world. This mechanical way of looking at things is really interesting. And then when he talks about people finding their own Christ consciousness and participating in this ascension, it's a great way to look at the world. And it was great to hear him be so optimistic, actually, about what's going on. But I wanted to get him to kind of define some of those terms, because I think a lot of people, when they listen to him, they get lost in the jargon, and they don't, and then they'll kind of blow off some of his messaging that's pretty in depth and pretty interesting, really, and deserves for people to take more of a deep dive into it. And so it was just an interesting conversation. It was kind of difficult. I felt like I was trying to pry some of these ideas out of him to get him to really explore them more deeply. And I hope that at least he was able to get his message across in the conversation, and I hope it doesn't come across as too disjointed. I can't say I was necessarily getting frustrated, but it was just sort of that I wanted to get some definitions for some of these concepts that he throws around a lot. In the hopes of getting people who are on the fence or people who are new to these ideas. I mean, because that's the thing, when someone is new to these ideas, it just comes across as sounding so crazy, quite honestly. And then as we got into the conversation, I mean, he just kind of revealed to me that he didn't care so much about these people who are, as he put it, guys sitting on the bar stool drinking their fifth beer at 11 in the morning. These suburbanites that have no inkling of contemplating some of these alternative thoughts. People that have been indoctrinated into what I describe as the colonized mind, and are just so comfortable there that they're not going to pay attention to ideas that are different from what they're getting on the mainstream media. He just had no interest. And, he kind of used that metaphor of doing triage for the people who are already well along the path of understanding these alternative perspectives, and he's just kind of targeting those people that are already in a place where they're going to hear what he's saying, and they're not going to be just, so filled with doubt. And it was interesting to me to hear him. I was almost wondering if my own approach, because I think that I'm constantly seeking the messaging that the average person listening to the mainstream media can listen to and then go, well, that whatever Doug is saying is interesting. At least is I want to be open-minded enough to look into an alternative perspective on, maybe reality and the world as we know it isn't exactly like they taught me in school, or I see on the mainstream news that the corporations and the governments are telling me. Maybe it's just maybe there is an independent perspective that's different from this. And so, it's just interesting to have these different points of view. I really liked what Sacha was saying when he talked about the people at the top of the pyramid. And this is one, actually, I was thinking that our perspectives may be different because he's kind of hobnobbing in a whole different social world than I am. He's hanging out with people at the UN. He's hanging out with world leaders that are actually interested in these alternative perspectives. And I think that because of the work that he does, and he's been doing it for so long, his entire social circle, maybe he's pretty surrounded by people that are already well along their way on this path. I mean, in my community, and for a lot of people probably listening to this podcast, it's kind of a lonely road. Um, and I'd like to be able to at least be able to learn how to have conversations with a lot of people in my community here in Northern California, to where they'll be able to say, well, I respect your perspective. I don't just think that you're a crazy person. I don't get instantly triggered into these defensive responses where I say that you're just talking crazy, and there's no way that the corporate media would be lying to me or weaponizing narratives, or the U.S. government would never engage in psychological operations against their own people. I want to be able to say, well, isn't my perspective at least possible? Isn't it? Can we have a conversation about it where I don't get shut down? And maybe he's just, he doesn't have to deal with that issue so much. Maybe his social circle is a little bit more open-minded to begin with, and he's just been in the scene for such a long time, for decades now, that he's more concerned with organizing people that are already ready to make this change, ready to decolonize their mind, ready to embrace alternative perspectives and set up communities and societies based on these ideas of natural justice and common law and individuation, and separate themselves from these collective thinking techniques and the social control of the elites. So that may have been a reason why the communication wasn't quite so smooth. But anyway, I'd be curious to hear what you all thought about all of that, and this idea of it does take a lot of time to try to convince somebody who's not really interested in paying attention to these ideas, even to engage. I mean, is it just a waste of time? Maybe we should all be hanging out on the forum sites for the shift, and not really engaging with those who don't really care. So that was just an interesting part of the conversation. Oh, and then I was going to mention his point about how then those people that are at the top of the pyramid really aren't always, and in fact very rarely, a part of this Luciferian system that he describes. He seemed to think that most of that action was happening kind of just below the capstone in the pyramid. The corporate controllers, the intelligence communities, the higher level bureaucrats that are engaged, so that even when a person does become a political leader, they really don't have the power to change the system. And that seemed to be something that he is dealing with. He told a story, I don't know if it's going to make it into the free section, but he told a story about going to a palace of a king, and the king practically crying to him, saying, I see what they're doing, but I can't do anything about it. And how interesting is that? That maybe only a small percentage of the prime ministers and the presidents of the world are actively involved in this elite power group. And it does seem to be that way. I mean, I'm not going to be a Trump supporter, but I did feel like he tried to bring in people like Flynn like Bannon. Say what you will about Bannon. I wasn't necessarily a fan of any of Trump's foreign policy necessarily, but these two guys were not in the Council on Foreign Relations groups. They were thinking outside of the thinking behind the Trilateral Commission, and every president always stocks their cabinet and surrounds themselves with members of these groups throughout history. As soon as he gets Flynn and Bannon in there, trying to include a different perspective, the mainstream media clearly hammered on both of them until they were out fairly early on in the Trump administration. It didn't seem to me like Trump was necessarily a part of the cabal, but didn't have the power to drain the swamp as he promised, and eventually just had to fold on so many issues. That it makes sense to me what Sacha was saying about how the very top, the people that are in power, they sort of become fronts, and they're the people that you see on the television set, but they're not really part of this cabal. And in fact, the cabal controls the bureaucracies, and so the people on top just don't have the power to make the changes that they'd want to change. Even if we could get a good person into one of these positions of power, they still couldn't change the system. So that was a fascinating concept. And then the other thing that kind of interested me, I was trying to get him again to talk about then this whole ascension process and these ideas about what is this, the good side, which I call indigenous consciousness for those of you who have listened to this podcast. And I often think of the internal energy system as part of this. Every other culture in the history of the world has had the chakra system or the meridian system in traditional Chinese medicine. In shamanistic cultures, a lot of their ceremonies are about recharging, empowering this internal energy system. It's a very common concept throughout the world in every culture, except if you've been colonized into this Western European culture, this science-based, and I, of course, consider a lot of it scientism. It doesn't really reflect actual scientific studies, but it's almost a mythology that has grown around this idea of science, and it's very materialistic. And it doesn't allow for the ideas of these internal energies. And his response was, well, all that is New Age woo, and I don't go for any of that. And I do agree wholeheartedly that a lot of the New Age movement has been weaponized in the same way as a lot of the good ideas in the patriarchal religions have then been twisted and weaponized in order to function as a part of this more cult-like behavior rather than individuating us, empowering us as individuals to make critical thinking decisions for ourselves. We just get into this kind of psychological conditioning that causes us to follow the authority figures, and this is what he calls the Luciferian dream spell. So it was just interesting, kind of trying to hash these things out with him, and he didn't want to go into that, into the internal system, and I wanted him to kind of describe this ascension process that he talks about a lot. He says it's coming in 2046, and he did mention maybe I can do another interview with him and we can discuss the whole time thing, because I know the calendar has a lot to do with all of this. The Gregorian calendar, which is linear, versus these other cyclical calendars that take into account the solar system going around the center of the universe, and then the different energies that are coming out of the center of the galaxy, and how they affect human consciousness, the consciousness of the planet as we move to these different points around the cycle as we go around the galaxy, as our solar system goes around the galaxy. So maybe I'll have him back on and we'll be able to have those conversations as well. I did want to, as a final note, just take on that there is always a lot of talk, a lot of chatter about the so-called controlled opposition that's out there, and Sacha has probably been attacked as much as anyone else and accused of this kind of controlled opposition thing, and I really do not like to go there. In terms of this program, the shift is about unifying the scene as much as possible. I've seen so many people say, oh, if I disagree with so and so, or I don't like their methodology, or for some reason maybe I distrust their background, or they have a certain amount of wealth, and so I distrust that. And then instantly they become controlled opposition. And I've literally seen people. Basically, if someone has a different interpretation than them about some minutiae of history or current events that they disagree with, and suddenly that person just doesn't know what they're talking about, and they're controlled opposition. So I, for one, was happy to have Sacha on the program just to be able to have a conversation and get his opinions and ideas and his particular perspective. And I do believe that he has done a lot of work to raise awareness on the planet. And he does have connections with a lot of the more upper class around the world, people in the United Nations, and he has access into those hallways. And I think that we need to unify as many people as possible. So again, I for one am happy that he's been doing that work, and I'm sure I'll probably hear some comments about all of these rumors that float around, but I really like to take a person's philosophy at face value and have these conversations with individuals as individuals, and try to avoid all of that kind of speculation as much as possible. So that's just my couple of cents worth about that. I just want to remind everybody again that they can find Sacha's stuff at humanitad.org. That's where you'll find a lot about the Humanitad Foundation and some of the stuff that they're doing around the world. They've got a few different initiatives that are happening that you could look into. Some sustainable community in Sierra Leone is one. A lot of sustainability initiatives and community initiatives where they're based on this liberated society where people have healthcare freedom, where the big corporations don't really have total control, and people can choose to develop healthcare systems or sustainable agriculture systems, sustainable building, all of these kinds of things. And he does get really high-class experts to work with him on these projects. So I urge you, again, to go to humanitad.org and check those out. And also, just to remind everyone, as he said, he is beginning this Lazarus initiative in March 21st, 2021. And this is going to be a series of symposiums throughout the year. And he does get really high quality guests to do these symposiums when he puts them on. And so I'm looking forward to this. I think there's going to be a lot of really good knowledge contained, and it'll be worth it to check them out. So you can go to sachastone.com to find out more as he gets more guests and he starts to organize this more. It's just coming up next month. So if you sign up for the newsletter there, then you can stay in touch with Sacha and continue to get updates as that initiative progresses. So thank you all for listening. This has been The Shift. I'm your host, Doug McKenty, and you can find all of my stuff again at www.theshiftnow.com. Got a lot of free content, almost 200 interviews at this point, probably posted under the free content tab. And of course, you can sign up for the newsletter, and I'll send you everything that I produce each week, my weekly newsletter. That's a great way to keep tabs. I'm starting to really try to get people to go to the website and sign up for the newsletter. So that's my primary form of distribution rather than depending on social media, which has become so untrustworthy in these last few years. So again, go to www.theshiftnow.com. You can check me out there. I am on social media, The Shift with Doug McKenty on Facebook and YouTube, at D McKenty on Twitter, and a variety of other social media sites now, Gab and Minds and Float, MeWe. I'm really expanding. I'm on brand new Tube. Actually, I've got all my videos, most of my videos, my last couple seasons up on brand new Tube, so that's a good place to go. I try to upload on BitChute, but it's been challenging. It doesn't seem to really want to process my stuff, so I've only got a couple of videos up there. But for now, YouTube and Facebook hadn't shut me down yet, so we're still good to go, and you can check it all out. Again, you can hit the website, theshiftnow.com, and that is the best place to go, especially signing up for the newsletter. All right, I will be back again next week with another episode of The Shift, and please remember to like, subscribe, or share when you're listening to this on your favorite social media sites, as I am relying on listeners like you to help distribute all of this stuff. And thanks again for checking it out. We'll see you next week. Take care.